get started here. I got handouts. Tom is handing some out over here. There's some too. Okay. Let me open us up with a word of prayer. Father, be with us now as we discuss important but difficult things. Lord, would you open our minds and hearts, we pray. Amen. All right. First time I've done a color printing. I had to for this one, so you can understand what's printed. Now, big disclaimers here. So this is actually, I'm a week behind, you could say, because I took a week that we just discussed things after the shooting of Charlie Kirk. That kind of put me behind. This is really last week's, or you could even think next week as Eve will come on the scene in later Genesis 2. So it doesn't exactly apply to my sermon today, but it's close. It's Genesis 1 and 2. Now, I just want to tell you my understanding of a pastoral role. All right? What I'm broaching here today is controversial material. All right? My understanding is that I actually have, in some ways, an easier job than many of you. That some of the things I will say today, I hope are true, but you could get fired for in your place of work. Now, thank God, we do have the First Amendment here, and I am protected by freedom of religion and freedom of speech. Some of the things I will say, and I'm not trying to be mean, please, I hope I keep the right spirit. I'm trying to do this helpful and right. But people have been kicked off social media. In the UK, there's arrests you might know of for some of the things here that we're going to broach. I didn't want to put it in a sermon, though. I don't think it rises to that level. There's so much. These are the decisions of a pastor. They're tough, right? What's on the cutting room floor of the sermon? And stuff today, I didn't think it rose to that level. It takes a lot of time to say some of the history I want to say today, and then Q&A and all that. So I hope this is the right place and format. But I am protected, I think, in ways that you might not be. And you might have questions of, what should I say and when? What hills do I die on? I worked as an engineer at Lockheed Martin. I mean, I understand secular work, and then I worked as a teacher, a programming teacher around the nation and the world. And I had to watch what I would talk about or not, and I was trying to hint about the gospel and hopefully have people ask me things during break and lunch and so forth. I wish I could do that over some of it, to be honest. But will you give me kind of the benefit of the doubt here as we go into some tough stuff, and I hope this is helpful. Okay? All right, let me start with Louise Perry. Anyone know Louise Perry? I think I've barely read maybe an article of hers over the years. A British writer and a feminist. But what kind of feminist? You might know there's 3 waves of feminism, but also, how do feminists see pornography and sex work? You might know that's been a dividing point in feminism. Now, I say that because Louise Perry has taken a position against pornography, against sex work. It's funny, I read her Wikipedia entry to get to know her a little bit better, and it said she has forbidden her husband to look at pornography. And I read that, and I'm like, that's okay by me. You go, girl. That sounds good to me. But the way it was worded, almost forbidden her husband. Anyway, so she has come to Christ, she says, in a very recent podcast interview. I tried to get her quote from the video. Here it is. There are differences between the sexes, and this is important, she says. Differences between the sexes. I have since writing the book become a Christian. She kind of drops a bombshell. She's a well-known writer. One of the reasons I ended up becoming a Christian, that if it were supernaturally true, she's kind of reasoning through this, you would expect it to be sociologically true. Now that's a little fancy, but what she's saying is that our roles, our social dimensions, male, female, and all that, she says, it looks true. And observing how quite sociologically true it has been very persuasive to me. I don't know about her conversion. I can't tell you anything more, what church she's going to or how deep this is, what else she said about it, I don't know. But as some have commented on this video of hers, it's getting around, that there is this phenomenon now, I can't tell you how big it is, I don't have an idea, of people coming from an appreciation of the doctrine of creation, Genesis 1 and 2. And that it looks true, that's reality. And that becomes persuasive to them as part of their conversion process, right? It's not all of conversion, what do you believe about Jesus? That's the most important thing. But it's interesting that there's this pipeline, as some have called it, I don't know if that's the right term, of those who respect reality and are finding it in the Christian worldview pertaining to, especially here, creation. All right, creation, what do I mean? I have the key verses for today. We won't be spending much time on these two verses, but this is the key. It's very simple. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. So you can see what I have highlighted. Male and female, and then go make babies. Okay? Very simple. So two sexes, and of course these two sexes are essential to reproduction. Okay? Now contrast that with what you see in the color picture. Now this is the gender unicorn. How many of you have seen this before? Okay, 1, 2, 3, only a few of you, 6, 7. I think before it was, genderbread man? I think it was, and then they turned it unicorn. Anyway. Now, this is created by a transgender advocacy group. Is this in our public schools nearby? Not that I know of. I actually used an AI engine to, it's able to search all the materials of a website, public school. And I'm just like, hey, our nearby public schools, is anyone teaching this or handing this out? As far as we know, no. If anyone has word different, I don't know. Let me know. I want to be informed about what's going on in all our schools, and I always want to respect parents and their decisions on schooling. But part of that respect is for us all to be well informed about the pros and cons of every schooling option. So in our area, there's no evidence that I know of. And I asked about Cheltenham, Upper Dublin, Abington, Lower Upper Moreland, that this is being used. So I don't know it. But I know that around the United States, some places it has been used. Now, look at the middle part. Sex assigned at birth. All right, so that is where you see male and female. And this is, just right out of Genesis, if you will, right out of anatomical observations from the beginning. Male and female. Now, there's a third category, intersex. We used to call that hermaphrodite, right? And so that is a third category there. We could talk about that category and how it's understood. But I just want to start there. Now, you see the language, sex assigned at birth. I'll come back to that later. And Now I want to, with that's kind of the beginning. Now go to the top, gender identity. I want you to see the rainbow there and see where the rainbow is in the unicorn. It's the unicorn's thoughts. You see that? So gender identity is your own conceptual self-understanding. Others can't see your thoughts, right? They could see your anatomy, but they can't see your thoughts. So gender identity is there. And look at the categories. Female, woman, girl, male, man, boy, other genders. Now, there are a couple interesting things there. One is male and female are there. I'm going to come back to that. That was supposed to be words just for sex, not gender. Until recently, this has kind of changed. Now, I'll come back to that. That might be confusing for you. The third category I want you to see too, other genders, plural. And you're probably aware that this list can get quite long today, right? We'll come back to that. I want you to also see how it's an arrow, right? And you see dots on the three arrows. This is probably representing a spectrum. All of these have arrows, and you see the dots at different places. So it's not just binary options. Most of these, there's a spectrum. All right. So gender identity, three things there, and it's dealing with the person's self-understanding of their gender identity. Now go to next one, gender expression. Gender expression, you see green, and look where that is on the unicorn. It's the dotted line following the unicorn's body, which means how do you express gender in your clothes, what you wear, your hairstyle, things like that. How do you express? Now, that's different than identity. You might conceive of yourself as one gender category, but express it for whatever reason, maybe societal expectations, with different clothes, different makeup, whatever. And you can see they're feminine, masculine, and then this category, other. And again, other is kind of a catch-all. Sex assigned at birth, I already mentioned. Now let's go to the fourth one. Physically attracted to. Women, men, and then again, other genders, plural. Again, a spectrum of options there. And finally, that has been distinguished during the last few years, or I don't know how far this goes back, from being emotionally attracted. So the distinction here is that you can be emotionally attracted, but not physically, sexually attracted. And again, men, women, or other genders you can be attracted to. There are tons of options here, right? Just think, I mean, it's really infinite when you have a spectrum, right? And there's many spectra, and at least, 5 categories, and at least 4 of them you're in control of. Sex assigned at birth, you were not in control of. But the other 4, your identity, your expression, who you're attracted to, emotionally attracted to. You might say, no, I'm not fully in control, but at least you tell people where you fit of those 4. Lots of options. What I wanted to do in my time before we get to Q&A is primarily this. How did we get here? A development of these ideas to get from male and female, and they make babies. That's Genesis 1. And really, if you think about it, that was pretty basic stuff, kind of taught around the world, no matter what religion. How did we get from that to this picture here? All right? And so let's go through some of the key moments in history. Let's start with number 1, the development of the concept of sexual orientation. Sexual orientation, you're used to these terms, heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual. Now, what you might not know, you might not have noticed, is that's not exactly in the Bible. Instead, what is in the Bible is, for instance, prohibitions of certain sexual activity, and lustful thoughts too, activities, and even desires. What it's not clearly talked about in the Bible is this as an identity, as an orientation, and certainly not one that is discussed as immutable. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that's not true in no way and all that. I'm just trying to trace the development of this. And this is 19th century. So in the 1860s, we're talking about German writers here, Karl Heinrich Ulrich, and then 1869, Carolee Maria Kurt-Benny, coined those terms, homosexuality, heterosexuality, bisexuality. So not just an act or a desire, but an identity, maybe even immutable from birth. Okay? It might be surprising to think, whoa, didn't people always think this way, that it was an identity immutable from birth or something like that? No. It was seen more simply as an act and a desire. I think evaluating this is controversial. I want to say this, that I've liked in our circles, what I learned 20-some years ago when I went to seminary, is this term same-sex attraction, for instance. SSA, we refer to it. And SSA, if you notice that term, it's kind of on safer ground that you just say attraction. It doesn't go into it's a deeper identity, or it was from birth, or how it was caused, or whatever. Just an attraction. And so we tend to use in our circles kind of that safer term, same-sex attraction. Okay? But the terms homosexuality, heterosexuality, bisexuality, they go something deeper. An orientation, a lot of times they mean immutable from birth. In fact, if you read the Obergefell decision, the 2015 decision, I read the whole thing, which nationalized a right for gay marriage. You'll see in the majority opinion, that's the way it's talked about, as basically an immutable orientation from birth. I'd like you just to think, oh, I didn't notice that was in the Bible, and just think through that category. Now let's move on. This is the one that's confused a lot of people. Number 2. Gender. That means something different than sex, starting in roughly the 1950s. Now, I've met a lot of Christians who haven't picked up on this, or maybe you have by now in 2025. I didn't pick up on it for a while and all that. I thought of sex and gender as synonyms. And in fact, that's how they originally meant, what they originally meant. And it might be, why was the word gender coined? It might be, this is the theory that I read, and it kind of makes sense to me, that people didn't like saying sex. Back in, I don't know, it was the Victorian, late 1800s and 1900s. Let's have another word for male, female. Let's use the word gender, so we don't have to use the word sex all the time. John Money comes around in the 1950s, and John Money is the one who starts to define these terms differently. So he redefines, I think that's fair to say, redefines the word gender. That gender is now not anatomical sex, but it's more a role. Gender role. That society expects of you, maybe. Men should look a certain way, wear certain clothes, do certain things, not do certain things. Roles, and those can differ significantly between societies, right? They've changed in America over 200, 300 years, so forth. So it's about gender roles according to social expectations, maybe psychological expectations, so forth. Different than sex. Sex, think anatomy. Think genitalia, to be crass. Or think of DNA. Male, female. So, male, female, anatomical sex. But if you say man, woman, genders. All right? Male, female, anatomical sex. Men, women. Gender roles. Now the new definition emerging from the 50s, John Money. All right. Some of you might know the history of John Money too, and some of the things he did in his research. That's a whole other story. 3, sex change through medical interventions. So one thing I'm fascinated by is, I think, maybe the driving force in history the last 200 years that probably was not the driving force in human history before that, is the history of technology. And so technology has made so many things possible. I think one of them, to be honest, hard to imagine the sexual revolution without the pill, if you think about it. Anyway, I'm not speaking against birth control, but just to say technologically, I think that was essential to some of the sexual revolution happening. So, and then there's other things in technology, of course. We think of the internet, and so forth, all that. Okay. Now we have medical interventions that can change your sex. This is part of the story. Puberty blockers, blocking your transition during puberty, Lupron. Cross-sex hormones. You have females who are saying, I'm really a man, gender role. You hear the difference. It's a female biologically, but saying I'm a man or I'm a boy, and transitioning medically. And they take testosterone. Takes a few months. I don't know if you've seen the videos of their voice changes. Maybe not 1 month, 2 months, sometimes it's 7 months, their voice changes. If they want to detransition later, their voice doesn't change back. In the examples I saw, maybe there's something long-term, some medical people. But the ones I've seen, it's a changing, and it's part of taking testosterone, T. And anyone, I do have a medical doctor, if I say anything wrong, please, when we get to Q&A, correct me. Then you have top surgery, development of that, dealing with breasts. Bottom surgery, dealing with genitalia area. Outcome from this technology, a full sex change really has never occurred. Now this might be fine print, but it's worth saying. We cannot fully medically transition someone if that means full reproductive abilities, chromosomal changes. And so I've seen a number of stories where people are left with a feeling that they're neither, they're in between. I don't want to say that's how everyone who receives this surgery, especially the bottom surgery, feels all the way. If you go all the way, that includes bottom surgery. But for some of them, certainly, they feel like they're in no man's land at the end. 4, most sexual orientations and gender identities are normalized. Key event, 1973, the DSM-2, so DSM, psychiatric Bible, if you will, removed homosexuality as sexual deviation and mental disorder. So there's obviously pejorative, titles, right? And those are removed, and it's very clear that this was you can read standard stuff online, Wikipedia again, or whatever, that this was one of the big successes of advocacy from the gay movement, all right? And they see it as such. Now, they won't say it's just advocacy, but that was one of their great successes. Then in 1980, DSM-3 introduced transsexualism. We don't use that term publicly today, but transsexualism as a diagnosis under psychosexual disorders. Again, pejorative. It's a disorder. That is supplanted then by the term gender dysphoria. And some of you would remember this term, gender dysphoria. And by 2013, the DSM-5 made clear that transgender is not inherently a mental disorder. So the same thing that happened decades earlier with homosexuality. A question for you to think about, and we can do this in the Q&A. Can you name a claimed sexual orientation that has not been normalized? Right? And this is an interesting question, not been normalized yet. The one that came to mind as I thought through this was minor attracted persons, right? MAPS, this different term from pedophile. If someone is attracted to a prepubescent child, is that an orientation? And if so, is it normalized? Is it normalized or they just shouldn't act on it? All right, then it becomes criminal. Or should it be normalized? And some of the more radical activists are saying yes. 5, explosion of recent developments. Preferred pronouns, as we probably all know, which has really made this quite an important issue for organizations, whether it's a church or a school, because pronouns, unlike sexual orientation, pronouns are part of ordinary discourse. What do you want to be called? He, they, or whatever. So this sets the rules of ordinary acceptable discourse for any organization. So basically every organization has to end up settling potential disputes among employees, among members of the organization. What is expected rules of discourse? So that's why this was so powerful for organizations, changing them in a way that you could say sexual orientation was not. New phrases. How do you avoid saying woman? I don't know if you've seen phrases like a menstruating person or a person with a uterus. And the number of genders explodes too. The highest number I've seen is like 70, but that's not typical. So things like, gender fluid, non-binary, or two-spirit, and different ones that you don't hear very often. And there's probably room for development. Usually when I hear it talked about now, they don't want to say this is the authoritative final list. We might discover more. Gender begins to be more important than anatomical sex. This took a little while. But in time, what you said about yourself, your gender identity, becomes very important in terms of public policy, including sports teams, including where male prisoners should be incarcerated if they say they're actually a woman, right? And we've seen examples, many, where gender has supplanted sex, anatomical sex, as more important for public policy and making decisions like this. The objectivity of sex becomes questioned. Sex assigned at birth. You can see there that they're kind of backing off from just an objective declaration of sex to it being assigned at birth. And confusingly, male and female sex has begun to be applied to gender. All right, so now you're probably getting lost here. So as I said, starting with John Money, gender becomes a societal and psychological role distinct from sexual anatomy. So sexual anatomy, again, male, female. Gender roles, man, woman. But as you can see, the gender unicorn, confusingly, starts to violate that a bit with gender identity, including male and female. So now you really have the categories confused. And how do you have a conversation? You're like, what are you referring to? Now, let me just add at the end here, before we go to Q&A, kind of my assessment, kind of as a pastor, but just kind of as a normal person too. how does this affect people, especially children, seeing all these options, right? All these possibilities. And this is the way I've processed it. I'm kind of stepping outside. I don't have the Bible as far as I don't have chapter and verse to prove everything I'm saying here. But my assessment is, one, I think there's a real appeal here for many students. I mean, it has to be an appeal. And part of it is, the one I just highlight, I don't have much text here at the end, is I don't feel comfortable in my own body. Has anyone ever felt that? Especially during puberty? Ooh. Or how about if you're not neurotypical? I think the experience I've had as a pastor and stuff in the last 10 years is these categories, especially around junior high. It could be high school too later. But I remember when my body was changing, I didn't like all of it, right? I know that's a simplistic explanation I'm giving. I know, but I'm seeing that myself anecdotally around that time. And I think if you're not comfortable with your body, what's wrong? And this might give you explanatory options. That's part of it. All right. Second is freedom. I think freedom is an attractive thing for so many people, either of concerning reality or avoiding the Christian faith. You know, as far as I have more freedom. This is going to seem liberating, right, to many people. I'm not fit into male, female, which I don't think I fit, or these expectations from society or something like that. I think there is a feeling of freedom here. Now, in the long run, how does this work out? I think confusion. Again, I'm painting with a broad brush. But confusion, because the message out there is, how do you know where you are? And the thing I hear the most is something like follow your heart, right? Look inside you. Don't look to other people. That's just external authorities, parents, churches, whatever, telling you what to do. No, you know. So you look inside. And that's kind of where the advice ends most of the time. Because if you think about it, when you look inside, you might say, how does that work? Wait, what are you saying? Is it some thought I have? Or what is it that is the authoritative, who you are, identity voice that answers this question? What is that? And I think biblically we know, and from experience, there isn't necessarily a clarion, infallible call from within you. There just isn't. Especially when I think something like this is flawed to begin with, deeply flawed. So what do people do? And from what I can tell, there's one of two options. If you're in that position, I can't listen to someone or whatever, I'm supposed to listen to myself or whatever, where do I fall on all this? One, I think it leads you to assess, it's your strongest feeling. You're going to start looking to where you feel the most deeply. Probably an emotion. When did you feel accepted? When did you feel this? You're probably going to follow emotions, because that's going to probably sound like your heart to you, right? And as we know, though, following your emotions in all things is not a trustworthy compass. The second thing is, I think, from what I see, is it really is socially conditioned that even though it's don't let anyone tell you who you are, and that's usually parents, teachers, and adults, or whatever, there is a subculture, whatever that subculture is. And boy, is it on the internet, and boy, is it powerful, right? But it could be, your peer group. And they're highly influential. So even though it's outside your heart, that subculture that you've connected with is usually very, very strong. So who are you? How do you determine it? That's the way I perceive it right now, is when they look inside, it's really their emotional state and emotional indicators they end up following. And then secondly, they actually are being influenced deeply by their social subculture. And that's how they end up finding wherever they are on here. And that might change tomorrow or the next day, of course, and all that. All right. I think I'll end there. And I'm sure we have no questions or comments to any of this, right? Josh.